So in this tutorial, we're going to have a look at how we use the basic type tools in Final Cut Pro 10 to make some more advanced animations. So how we work smartly with our type tools and then split up and animate those titles with keyframes. So this is a really great way if you don't want to get into something like Apple Motion for creating your own custom titles, to create more advanced animations in Final Cut Pro 10 using layers and keyframes. And if this is your first visit to the channel, then please do hit the subscribe button and the notifications button if tips and tricks for Final Cut Pro 10 are something you're interested in. I regularly post answers to viewers' questions, so if you have your own questions about Final Cut Pro 10, then please do post them in the comments below. Otherwise, let's dive into how we do this text animation in Final Cut Pro 10. So we're going to dive right in here and break down how we create this title animation. Now, the first thing to do on the timeline here, where I have the titles already set up, is to just grab them all and delete them. We're going to start from scratch with this animation. So we set up a background here. And basically here, we're going to first of all add a basic title layer to our video, and then we're going to typeset that title. So to add a title, we can come up to our titles on the top left, and we are looking here for our bumper and opener titles and the basic title. Now we can drag this down, but we can also use the shortcut to add a basic title without having to drag it down, which is Control and T, and that will add your basic title straight to the timeline. So drag it down or use Control and T to add it, either will work. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to lay out our type in one type box, and then we're going to do some duplication and lining up of different layers of the type. So the first thing we'll do is select our type layer, come up to our inspector on the top right. Now before we get started, actually, or go any further, we're just going to go to Window, Workspaces, and set the default workspace, and that just means that now we've got our type layer down on the timeline. We're all looking at exactly the same thing on screen. So where we want to be up in our inspector on the top right hand side is in the second kind of paragraph text inspector element here. Okay, so you should have your title inspector, which will show you published parameters of some type effects. There are none for this basic title, and then the normal kind of editing tool that we have here. And if we bring our playhead over our title, we can see it here, and then also the video and color correction icons here, but we want to be on this paragraph one. So we're going to type in caps the text we're going to use for this particular exercise. And so now we're going to select all this and bump the size up. So to do that, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to come to our 2D styles first of all and increase the size, and then we're going to scroll down and increase the font size. Now if you try and scroll down from within the type window itself, you'll notice it won't actually scroll. You need to come across to the right hand side and just make sure you scroll here using the scroll bar. So now we're going to increase our type size, and I want to move the position of my type. So I basically want to lift it up above this line. Now with the type layer selected and in the paragraph type options here, we can lift this up, and I want to make sure that yellow line is still active as we do this. And now we're going to scroll back up to our type and just select the second line here. We want to make this a lot bigger than the water is word, so the second line is going to be a bit bigger. So once you increase your type right to the right hand side there, if you hover over the number to the right of the size option, we can still kind of keep increasing. And if we hold down shift as we do that, it will increase at a faster rate. So you can see without shift, we're kind of changing slowly the size of the type. If we hold down shift, then we're increasing that nice and quickly. It's a nice quick way of increasing the size of your type. Then we're going to scroll back up, grab both our lines of type, and we're just going to work on the line spacing for our type here. So we'll pull this back basically, so we get them just hovering around this horizon line. So this is the reason for kind of deliberately choosing this image, is it gives a nice kind of divider between these two lines. So now we're going to work on the color in the first line. So we're going to scroll back up and just select that first line of text. Now we've got all this lined up, and once we've done that, we'll scroll down and we're looking for the face options down the bottom. So in each of these options there are different parameters we can set. but we need to click this show button to actually bring those parameters up. So I'm going to bring the show button up here, and we can select a color using the color picker here using the down arrow, or if we click on the box it will bring up our colors panel. And I actually want to use the color picker to actually select one of the blues from the ocean here. So if we grab the color picker, when we hover over anywhere on our screen, it's going to allow us to select that color where we're pointing towards. So we'll select the blue here, and I want to keep this kind of same tone of blue, but just increase the saturation and the brightness just a little bit. So if you're using the RGB sliders over on the left hand side here, just jump to the hue, saturation and brightness sliders, and that will allow you on the top here, and it's this second tab that we're on. So if you see the color picker, you just want to jump to the second tab and the HSB sliders, and that will allow you to control the saturation. So we can kind of increase the saturation of our type, and we can also just kind of bump the brightness up just a little bit, so we can have a bit of a richer color, but it's still matching the tone of the ocean. So we're just kind of lifting it up, but we're not changing the hue of that particular blue. So now that we have this all set up, we're going to close our colors window here. Type is perfect. We're going to duplicate this 3 times. So I'm going to do this one at a time. So I'm going to leave my background layer here, and to duplicate that I've just held down the Alt key, and I can drag this up and it will allow me to create a copy of that layer. So with the copy of the layer, I just want the first word in this. I'm just going to leave my playhead hovering over both of these, and we're going to delete the last 2 words, which is going to kind of make a bit of a mess up at the top here. Now, in order to fix this, we're going to come down to our basic type options, and we're looking just for the position here, so the X position, where we can hover over the number and just drag it to the left. And I'm just keeping that background layer there so I can kind of realign my type once I've broken it into the 3 different layers that we're going to use to create the animation. So we've got the layer water is there. I'm just tapping V to show and hide this layer. And now we're going to duplicate this layer again, and we're going to delete life and water. And again, we'll scroll down to the X position, and this time increase it, and I'm holding down Shift as well. So Shift is a really nice shortcut. It allows you to move your type faster than you can by not holding Shift. So if we hold down Shift, you can see it moves a bit faster, and then when we let go, we can kind of refine that position. Okay, so that's the first 2 lines, and then we'll go for the last line as well. And I've got everything aligned here nicely in the first layer here, the first type layer. We're going to delete the water is from our type up here and drop the life up, and then we'll come down and we're going to modify this time the Y position to bring that back down over the life below there. It doesn't need to be perfectly placed. We're looking for a kind of rough positioning. And I prefer to do this X and Y movement here because it just means that we're not accidentally going to unalign things as we move things around. So basically now we've got our 3 layers. If we now delete the bottom layer here, then you can see as I disable each of these, we've got each individual layer, and now we can get into our animation. So we'll animate water first of all. And so basically the way that I'll animate type like this, I'll think about where I want it to finish, set a keyframe, and then come back to the beginning. So I'm going to play this through and imagine water animating on. So somewhere around about this point is where I want the animation to finish. So I'm going to come to my transform tool here and set a keyframe. So that's locked a keyframe in this particular spot. And if we right click on our clip and go to show video animation, we can see the keyframes that have been added there. So the little diamonds under transform is where the keyframe's been added. So now if I come back in time and hover right over the middle, so we're moving water. So I'm going to pull this right off the screen. So as I drag it, I just want to make sure that it snaps to that yellow line. So I want to see the yellow line on as I move it off screen. And now we've created our first bit of animation. So we only need to add the first keyframe, and then any other keyframes, any other movement that we add in will be created automatically. So we've got our first little bit of animation there. Now with the video animation showing, we can speed up our animation by moving the keyframes closer together, and we can slow things down by moving them apart. So you can see now we'll end up with a much slower animation. So we're going to keep this nice and snappy. But also you can see here that we can kind of keep modifying this as we work on it further. So now we'll turn on the show video animation for the is layer. So I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to play ahead, and around about here I want the animation for is to finish. So I'm going to add a keyframe here, and then I'll come back to just before life has finished animating on. So I'm holding down K and tapping J to just move back a few frames. And now I will, with my is layer selected, I'm going to move this up. And you can see, because we've changed the alignment of our text in the type options rather than in the transform options, we get that kind of nice snapping to the middle there. So I'm going to move that up and come to the left, play that through. Okay, and you can modify the kind of movement of your type again by moving the keyframes around just to get the timing nice and perfect. Okay, so we made that a little bit slow, and maybe we'll just hold down Command and tap plus just to zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to move these keyframes just a little bit close together so it kind of snaps into position. Okay, and then we'll come up to life. So if we imagine it being said, water is life, it's somewhere around about here that we want the animation to finish. So we'll show the video animation, and then we'll add a keyframe here, come back to just before the is has finished animating on, and then we'll drag life down until it's just off the screen. And now I'll probably speed this up a little bit. So now we have our full animation animating onto screen. Okay, so to finish this up, one thing you may sometimes want to do, I'm going to tap Shift and Z so we can see our whole timeline, and then I can close my video animation, and actually we'll zoom into the timeline a little bit. So Shift, Command and plus will increase the height of your timeline. So now if we play this through, the timing is pretty good. And what we want to do is fade this out at the end. So if you watch the example through at the beginning and remember that, then we have a little bit of a blur and a fade out at the end. And we don't want to do this individually on each individual letter. We want to do this on all of the layers all in one go. So I'm actually going to copy these. So I'll select all my layers by just clicking and dragging a marquee around them all. Hold down Alt or Option, drag ahead in time, and we'll go to File, New and Compound Clip, or Option and G to create a new compound clip, and we'll just leave the name at the default for the moment. Click OK, and so now we have a layer that will keep that animation within it, but we can apply effects now to the entire compound clip on its own. So when we feel like this has been on screen long enough, then we can pause it. We can trim from the end. So we've got a nice amount of space at the end of this title that we can trim. And then we'll go ahead and actually add an effect here. So we're going to come across to our effects. I'm going to come to blur, and we're looking for the Gaussian blur. So I'm just going to drag that right onto my type, which is going to blur everything. Now I don't want it to be blurred all the way through. I just want it to blur at the end. So I'm going to come just before the end of my clip here, and we will decrease the blur amount to 0. So it's going to be perfectly sharpened up. So again, in your video options, inspector, you can see we can increase and decrease the blur options there, and for any other effects that you've added. So now on the right hand side, when we hover over the amount of blur, we can add a keyframe. And then if we come ahead in time to the end of our clip and then back one frame by tapping the left cursor key, we can then increase the blur amount. So we've got our clip blurring, and we just want to add a little fade there as well, so the blur pops and then it fades out. So to add a transition or a cross dissolve here at the end of this to fade it out, we can come to our transitions and go to dissolves, and we'll just use a standard cross dissolve here. I'm going to remove it from the beginning of my clip, and then we'll just trim it right down so it's nice and short. So basically our clip is going to blur and fade out at the same time. If we right click here, we can show the video animation, and we have that blur, Gaussian blur video animation here. So if we wanted to blur out sooner, then we can do that. To change the duration of the transition, and we just hover over the beginning or end of the transition, and we can stretch that out so we can have it fade out a little bit slower. It's a little bit of a softer fade. And that is almost everything. So basically now we have our title animating on with keyframes. We can always jump into our compound clip here to, if we double click, we can come in and we can modify the elements in our compound clip. So if we need to refine any animation elements or anything like that, we can come into the compound clip and modify things, so speed things up or slow them down. And then if we hit the little back arrow here, it will take us back into our clip, and we can play it through, check everything is fine, blurs out nicely at the end. So the one very last thing that we can do as well, because this is a compound clip, we can also animate some movement into that compound clip. So what I'm going to do is, as this animates on, just as life finishes animating on, I'm going to turn on a keyframe for the motion properties, and we'll come ahead towards the end of our clip, and I'm going to just zoom in like this. So basically we're playing through and then we fade out. So I'm actually going to right click, show my video animation, and then come to that last keyframe and just move this up a little bit so that we're trying to stay on that horizon line. So I'm just going to move this down just a notch. So yeah, so now we've got the kind of movement of the text away, staying on that horizon line with the water is and the life below it kind of working. Nice. So that's how to create a text animation in Final Cut Pro with kind of nice timing. If we added a music track on here, we might look at the music track to think about where we align certain parts of our keyframing for our video animation. So if we've got beats down here, we might want to make things snappier or a little bit slower depending on the style of music. But we can keep an eye on the waveform if we do have music there, and then align our keyframes to that waveform. One note about keyframes is, if you are making animations here, just be careful about adding keyframes in strange spots. So if I want to realign my text here, you'll notice we're going to get a funny little jump because we added extra keyframes here. So what's useful to know is how to remove your keyframes. So when I'm over the top of keyframes, and the kind of one of the easiest ways of navigating between the keyframes on the timeline is, we can get it back up, is to use the arrows to move to the previous and the next keyframe. And then if we're on a keyframe and we press this option, we can delete a keyframe, and that will remove the little bit of jumpiness that we had. So just keep an eye out for that. If you get any jumpiness, then sometimes it's in your keyframes. We can also right click here as well and delete keyframes, but sometimes if you've got lots and lots of keyframes, it's easier to do it on the timeline. So I hope that's been useful. If you have any questions about Final Cut Pro 10, Apple Motion, then please do leave a comment below, and I look forward to seeing you on the next tutorial.